All right, hello. I am Matt Cropp, the co-executive director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center, and this is the first episode of what I'm hoping will be kind of a monthly conversation with people who are doing interesting things in the employee ownership world. Currently, it's under the very creative, inventive name of EO Conversations, but it could turn into something else. But I'm excited to have as the first person to be hanging out with at this lunch hour on a Friday, Camille Kerr, who's been really involved in a wide variety of employee ownership space things over the years, has worked for a number of organizations, and is kind of currently working on some pretty interesting stuff around the newish to the United States, at least, employee ownership trust model, and is operating out of Chicago. So Camille, happy to have you have on for a conversation.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so let's kind of start with just your background, how you got into sort of the employee ownership world and your path through it, and any key things you feel like you've learned along the way around kind of what's important and what's impactful for this model, and why people should care about making sure more employees have a stake in the businesses they work for.
Oh, I'm doing the pitch too. Okay, I can do the pitch. All right, yeah. So I got an I went to law school to do civil rights work and social justice work, and during my time in law school, really very quickly, one, started burning out because civil rights litigation is just emotionally and mentally and in every way taxing, and I at the time didn't quite have the resilience and stamina to handle it. And then the other thing was that it felt like if we did well in every single one of our cases, if we won everything that we were doing, the underlying economics and systemic problems would remain. So I had an eagerness to find a form, work in the economic justice space. How do we make it so that that our resources are more equally distributed, and that we remedy the issues that have led to the current economic, or work towards remedying the issues that have led to the current economic disparities that we see. And so I kind of, there's a couple of different spaces you can go into in economic justice. One of them was labor. But I really was feeling it at the time. I wanted a more forward-facing, vision-oriented strategy of what is the thing that we want to build. And at least in the interviews that I went into with labor, it was really just about fighting under the current system for more. That's how I encountered some of the interviews they were going through. So there was a job available at this organization called the National Center for Employee Ownership. And to be frank, when I looked at the website at first, I was like, I don't know, this looks a little bit stale for what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do social justice. But when I met the people who were doing it, like Corey Rosen, who was the founder of the National Center for Employee Ownership, he was so passionate about this idea and what it could do for the country that I was like, all right, let's just give this a try. Let's try this out. And what I found was a world that I didn't know existed, and the incoming executive director, Lauren Rogers, was there too. He was very connected to the worker cooperative space as well. What I found was this world I didn't know existed of a community that was promoting this idea of a different way to structure our economic system. And there were a number of everyone who was in the field seemed to be diehard and feel like this was the answer, right? So I was like, all right, I need to learn this stuff better. So at NCEO, I was the director of research. I did research on primarily ESOPs, on just every aspect of them. I was really in a learning phase, figuring out okay, wait a minute, how do the technical aspects of these plans work? How do they actually affect employee culture? So we did stuff on executive compensation, on governance, on ownership culture in ESOPs, and we started a program to just try to spread them by replicating what VEOC and OEOC had done through having additional state centers throughout the country. So, and then I was talking to Melissa Hoover, who was the executive director of at the time, the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives and the Democracy at Work Institute, and had just gotten resources for DAWI which is the field building side of the federation, and the federation is the organization, if you don't know that, of worker cooperatives in the Trade Association of Worker Cooperatives in the U.S. And so they were building out this field building, and so they were thinking about this vision of really spreading the word about worker cooperatives, and finally getting some traction and funding for this idea after, you know, working in it in a while, working at the U.S. Federation for a while in kind of a scrappy, bootstrappy way. They finally were getting this traction, and so. For me, one, the worker cooperative space was much more tied to social justice issues and had kind of the ethos of underlying transformative change for our economic system, whereas that's not always the case in the ESOP world. So it was really attractive for me to go over to that space and to get to know this other community, which was adjacent and which I had been part of through my role on the board of Prospera, which is it used to be called Wages, but that I wasn't as deeply involved in as I was the ESOP space. And so, you know, I came to you know, fall in love with this worker cooperative space, which really put at the forefront racial equity and the needs of under-resourced communities, and head-on battling the issues of like recent immigrants and formerly incarcerated workers through employment access. And so after I worked there for 2 years, just really elevating the idea of worker cooperatives, doing speaking gigs, putting out publications, making sure that this concept was more widely known, and had a hunger to be more hands-on. I felt like I was talking about things that I didn't have enough lived experience with. So I switched over to ICA to really, ICA Group, which has been around since 1977, 1978. And their charge was they had experienced the Mondragon model in Spain. Their founders had seen that, and they were like, we need to translate what Mondragon is here in the U.S. as a community economic development model. And they're kind of you know, they've done a lot of the consulting, and, you know, had done some of the early conversions from a regular business to employee ownership back in the day. And so I wanted to be in that consulting role, really be more hands-on. So in that role, I got to do conversions. I helped Sunlight and Power become an employee-owned democratic ESOP. I got to work with labor organizations that were flirting with worker ownership as a way to organize their members, or to create aligned employers. And we'll talk a little bit more about this trust model that I got to work with with Cooperative Home Care Associates and PHI with. And yeah, and I got to do work in childcare and home care, and in areas where we see a lot of jobs that are undervalued, work that's undervalued, and tried to create a new, you know, work towards a new paradigm that is really providing those jobs. I mean, the caretaking, which is such a critical role in our society, providing companionship and love and care to our loved ones, and really thinking about how can worker ownership be a tool to elevate and offer, you know, at least living wages and closer towards the respected care that those jobs deserve. And so I moved to Chicago, enrolled out of ICA. I know there's like a lot of transitions. It was over, you know, I guess 9 years now, 9 years now that I've been in the field, but rolled out of ICA to do my own. We're starting our own, and I'm doing some consulting still, mostly to pay the bills, but they're also really interesting projects. But the main thing that's close to my heart is we're building here in Chicago a cooperative. We're trying to be really at the intersection of social justice and organizing, and then business expertise, building a cooperative for formerly incarcerated women, and trying to access the same level of like business sophistication that a lot of, you know, that a lot of startups don't have access to, but having those organizing values, centering the people most affected as paramount, even to that business expertise, making sure the voices of people are really central to what we're building. So that's kind of the trajectory. It was a lot of talking in a short amount of time. So why don't so if you have any thoughts before I jump in more?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about your path is you've really kind of, you know, in a lot of the employee ownership world, right? We have, you know, in terms of broad-based employee ownership, right? The thing where every employee, at least full-time employee, has a path to becoming a co-owner of the business they work at. You know, there's a lot of compartmentalization where it's like, okay, a lot of people specialize in ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. A lot of people sort of are kind of focused in on the co-op model, and you've kind of straddled both worlds, and then also kind of have been, you know, your latest work have been kind of getting into this employee ownership, you know, purpose trust approach as a kind of third option on the table. So just kind of, you know, again, drawing on that experience, kind of going between the different compartments that many people kind of are you know, primarily working in, you know, from a strategic perspective, you know, what gaps do you see or sort of kind of perceive there to be in the current work that's being done, and sort of, and what is the sort of the niche or advantage to this kind of new model you're working on that can kind of like, you know, open up new opportunities as you see it?
Yeah, and so just slight step back on that. Mm-hmm. So the reason that I kind of float and have, so the ideology behind, you know, why I'm committed to this work is really, I believe that everybody should have ownership over our work. I think that the entire economy, like this idea that every company might not be good for a co-op or an ESOP, and I understand that a transaction might not be the right step for a company at any given time, but I do believe that it's the only fair way to structure an economy, just as I believe that political democracy is the only fair way to structure our political bodies. I think that democracy is the only fair way to structure our economic institutions. And so for me, you know, these tools are, you know, ways that passionate people have come up with that have like at least some pieces of those values in them, and let's use them to bring that about, right? Like, let's use them to bring this new, like a better economic system that really centers people, as opposed to a select few people that already have capital. And so for me, the form, while I do like, I really like the cooperative principles, and I really like the Mondragon principles, and I like all of the different ways that these have manifested. I think it's a rights analysis for me, is that we should have the right to own our workplaces. And those principles, many of those principles should be integrated into that. But that's the underlying concept, is that you know, kind of an Ellerman draw is like the employment contract. It should be not a thing. You shouldn't be able to rent people for a period of time. We should be collectively organizing ourselves to create meet our economic needs as a society. So ESOPs, I think, you know, the mechanisms that they've created, the tax benefits, and just creating a set formalized mechanism with a whole consulting world around it to do them well. I mean, the level of sophistication involved is really helpful for building these at scale, right? There's legislation that embodies it. There's, you know, people who know how to do it well. And the thing that we just need to add is democracy to that, which, you know, isn't a small thing, but I do, and there's some issues that I think because of the way ESOPs were created that make them difficult to use, and some of the financial mechanisms make them hard to be sustainable, like the repurchase obligation, stuff like that. But overall, there's such a powerful existing tool that it's hard for me to say, yeah, let's not use that. And then the other, and worker cooperatives, I think are, there's like incredible value to just direct ownership by the people who work there. There's also a lot of difficulty with direct ownership because people come in and out, who gets to be in, like those types of questions are hard. Like what happens when they leave? Like how do you buy them out? Whereas I do feel like in the UK with the trust model that they've created, where as long as you are a worker there, you have rights, right? And you have dividend rights, and that's what they use the trust for. As long as you're a worker there, you have dividend rights and you have voting rights. And then when you leave, you no longer have those, right? And it's not about having a share that you own and then having to resell it right at a moment. I think that mechanism makes sense. It makes sense. It's just, and my only issue with employee ownership trusts is that they're not part of our law right now. So it's, they're not tax efficient, and that's difficult. Transferring things in and out of a trust, that's not what these vehicles were created for in the U.S., right? So we're doing workarounds whenever we use them.
Right.
And that's fine.
Hacking an existing legal structure in order to allow this to happen.
We're hacking an existing legal structure. Yeah. And honestly, I think they probably are I think that it is one of the, if you do it right, if it's required to be democratic, if you do have to, if you have these elements to it, I do think it's probably the best structure, just because it creates a vehicle for like rights that are tied to employment, and for that to be perpetual, right? I mean, so those are really powerful things. It's just not here yet. But, Kelso, who started the ESOP back in the, he formed one back in '56 and got them into law in the '70s. He hacked using, I think, profit sharing plans at the time to do the same thing, and they didn't have the ability to leverage the way that they do now. So he had to hack until he got it into law too. So I have no issue with us hacking in the meantime. But because of that, it might not be the best vehicle for everyone right now, just because the tax issues and the legal issues involved. It's just not quite perfect yet. But we used it for, and one of the things I have, maybe tension with some people in this space about is so people are using it as a stewardship vehicle, right? Like this idea that that companies should have more of a purpose than shareholder primacy, which we're all in agreement on, and that for some people that should be managed by stewards, people who are like thinking on behalf of workers or on behalf of the environment or on behalf of something. And so there's at least one multi-stakeholder trust that's been built that has this with OGC, organically grown, I think it is, that has this stewardship trust, perpetual trust model, which I think is interesting. But my question is, how are stewards held accountable? Because to me, one of the like underlying principles of democracy is that people are accountable to the people who are governed, right? You have to be accountable to those who you govern. And in a stewardship model, is that the case? And how is that the case? Like how do you build in accountability and stewardship? But I did create basically a stewardship trust. So I worked with Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is the largest worker cooperative in the U.S., Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute, PHI, which is their affiliated policy and training partner, and the ICA Group together to build we called it the Home Care Workers Purpose Trust. And so this trust is exactly what I was kind of questioning before, a stewardship trust, where ICA, PHI, and CHCA are acting on behalf of the rights of workers. And so this trust would own an ownership interest, maybe majority, maybe minority. In our first venture, it's a minority interest of what might be a very large company. We'll see in the next couple of months if we get the contract or not. But the trust owns an interest in a joint venture with an operating company that then gets government contracts. So what we're using the trust for is basically a more socially responsible outsourcing for public entities. So in this case, the state of Washington is outsourcing some of its home care program. It's going to privatize its home care program. And we're like, oh no, these workers have benefited from having the state and the union be the stewards of this program, right? Like, and that's why the wages and the care are both way better than, and I think they're ranked #1 in terms of the consumer side, and they're some of the best paid home care workers in the country. And it's because of this partnership between the state and the union. And if they privatize it, who's going to look out for their interests? Maybe in the front end, somebody's going to say, oh yeah, we really care about the same things you care about. But how do we know that's not going to degrade over time? And so we created the Home Care Workers Purpose Trust to negotiate an ownership interest in the company that would administer it, so as to give this, and in return, what they get from partnering with us is they give the state confidence that we have the workers' interest in mind, right? That's something that is long-term. You can trust PHI, CHCA, and ICA Group because that's our mission. That's who we are. It's kind of, it's very squarely a stewardship, nonprofit-oriented model, although CHCA obviously is governed by its workers. So there is worker representation, but not of the workers who are in the company or who are part of the company. But what we do have in that case is, one, they have union representation. So they have that. And then part of what we will negotiate as the employer with the union is some level of worker voice in the governance of the company as well. So it won't be part of our governance structure, but it will be part of our operations, because we will negotiate for that, right, with the union. So those are some of that's kind of why we built the trust. And even though in general, I do prefer direct democracy, I prefer democracy to be in the structures that I'm participating in. In this case, there's a little bit of difficulty with cooperatives being unionized on a legal front. There's uncertainty. It's happened. There are unionized cooperatives, but we needed for this one to be airtight, since it's such a big program, and since the union representation is so critical to these workers. We wanted to make sure there was we didn't open that up for challenges for like union cooperatization. So those are some of the reasons we did it. It's really an exciting project. We put in our bid. I think we're re-upping our bid pretty soon. There were some changes to the RFP, and we should know in the next couple of months whether we have somewhere in the range of 15,000 to 40,000, depending on whether we get a whole contract or part of it.
Wow.
Person company that's owned at least partially by a purpose trust.
So that actually brings up one interesting kind of question in terms of, again, those existing primary models that we use in the field, the ESOP and the worker co-op. With the ESOP, it's fairly high overhead to set up, but you can have kind of minority or partial ownership of the firm. Whereas with a worker co-op, because a co-op essentially like functions to decommodify a firm, right? So it makes it hard to think of it in terms of a pie that you're thinking about percentage slices. Then it's very rare to see sort of a scheme that allows for a firm to be partially owned by a co-op and partially owned by something else. So this idea of the sort of purpose trust being a partial owner kind of as something that's lower overhead than an ESOP seems like an interesting potential niche. Like, how does that play out, or sort of like, how do you see that kind of like fitting in to the sort of broader strategy of creating opportunities for employee ownership?
Yeah, I think it does. So I have heard people talking about this mechanism where the workers form a separate business and that business owns a portion, like easing in worker cooperatives by basically starting a separate labor co-op with the workers that then owns a part of the original company and then takes over more and more ownership as a way to get around that. And I think that actually Ellerman and a couple others in Eastern Europe are trying to innovate on that front too. So I don't think we're that we can't. I don't think it's impossible to use that model to stage in, but it certainly is. Like other things that we've been doing, is kind of a hack, right? We're trying to figure out a way around it. Whereas I think the trust vehicle, just like ESOPs, could very well phase, partial ownership in, as soon as the tax implications of what we're doing aren't scary. Because right now.
Can you talk a little bit about that, just in terms of, because that's definitely one of the considerations as people kind of think about entity choice. So like, what is the current status, and what would be kind of, if you were sort of could wave a magic wand and create sort of what you think would be a fair and equitable kind of an environment for these things, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think you would basically have minimal taxation on transferring wealth into the trust, right? Minimal, if any, taxation on, or at least just comparable to ESOP taxation, right? Like you could at least defer it or something like that, about transferring wealth into the trust. And then, honestly, it would just be like very similar to ESOP benefits on the tax front, because, if you could have the proportion that's owned by the trust be tax-free, right? So that you would encourage people to be 100% owned by this trust vehicle. The main differences would really be, ESOP, it wouldn't be a retirement plan, right? That's something that we don't want the regulation of it being a retirement plan. It wouldn't require shares to come in and out. So it's not like you own those shares. It's just a trust that holds all the shares of the company on behalf, and you become a beneficiary, or you become you gain rights by working there that are outlined by the trust, right? And so no shares have to go in and out. So the only other tax implication would be that those dividends that, on a whole go to workers. Like right now, you kind of have to bonus people out because you don't want money going into the trust. The trusts are very highly taxed. So you basically just reduce the income of the company by bonusing the money out. And that's not tax efficient for people or for the company. So basically, the ways that it operates, if we could get what the UK has for these, I think it would be a major boon to employee ownership. And it is just, the retirement thing is really, as you know, it's just a legacy of when it was put into law, and really not why. Not an innate part of employee ownership structures.
Right. Yeah. It seems like there's an interesting balance there in terms of the kind of regulatory burden and the relative tax benefits, where the ESOP, because it's embedded in ERISA and the American retirement law system, right? That adds an entirely sort of like new level of overhead. With a co-op, because it's direct ownership, it's pretty minimal overhead in terms of dealing with any kind of like governmental things, but there's a much greater level of kind of participation in that way. So it's kind of a different form of work, but there's also a fairly high level of work to set up. And so it seems like it's something, if you were to hit that balance where it's not part of retirement law, so you don't have kind of the full pension regulatory system sitting on top of it, that would significantly reduce the cost. But at the same time, if there were kind of certain tax benefits, then the state then has some stake in ensuring kind of fair play and anti-abuse stuff. So that would some more regulatory burden than there is now. So Is there?
And what I was thinking, if we could do like something that's, we were kind of, Nathan Schneider and I had, I don't know, I was walking through New York and he was wearing a baby. So we were just kind of like, let's have our like thinking time right now. But we were like, if we could create a vehicle that was super flexible, like a trust vehicle that was super flexible, so it could do the things that they want to do with consumer trust or, the buy Twitter type, like that it could be on that side too. But the only tax incentives really would be if you had democracy, if you had, workplace democracy, or if you had stakeholder democracy of some sort, that would be, I think that would make sense, because
so
we want people to be able to
standards.
innovate. Exactly. But if you're going to get the benefits of our taxpayers' money, then you have to be doing something that's better, right? Not just using an interesting form, but actually being accountable to the workers and to the stakeholders who you work with. So I think that if we could innovate with our legal friends, like what is a trust structure that is flexible enough to allow for people to create different things and come up with the right kind of answers, but at the same time, incentivize certain structures that really put workers first. And for me, that's the stakeholder that really matters in terms of like who's most governed in an economic institution. It's the worker, right? So that's, for me, like workplace democracy would be incentivized, but the trust use could be for any number of different things. So you could really, you could have the flexibility to figure out what are the fun new economic structures that we could use in a new economic system. That's kind of what we were playing with.
So where do you see this work kind of from here happening to kind of move that ball forward, right? Because it seems like there's a handful of practitioners in the U.S. who are interested in this, and academics like Nathan, and but in terms of kind of saying, okay, getting to the point where we have almost a boilerplate or type proposal to bring to state legislatures and bring to the federal government to say like, hey, like this is beneficial, let's put a framework in place. Do you see sort of, are there any particular institutions that are taking kind of a special interest in this, or is it more this kind of like, coalition of the willing practitioners who are kind of, seeing what can be figured out, or where does that push come from?
I was just planning to pontificate for another decade or so, and then go from there. No, I think that the interest in this is growing. I don't know that anybody's quite taking the lead on it yet, but I know that there's a crew of people who are deeply interested in this idea. And I think, as soon as we have a minute to breathe or the right conference setting or whatever, we'll figure out who's going to pull it's basically like who's going to pull the resources together so that we can have some room and we can have some space to work on exclusively that for a little, or not even exclusively that, but just have some space to work on building that out. We are having a little, I think there will be an upcoming webinar. I'll let you know if you want to pass out too, about what these structures can be. And, also the controversy around like when our trusts are appropriate and what are the limitations of that form. So I think we'll be talking about that soon, and hopefully our collaboration and discussion there will lead us into a little more formal work together on the issue. We are definitely talking about it, but we're not quite there yet. But it's an exciting time for innovation, and I think some people have taken the lead. Like Nathan Schneider just put out that article on SOPs, on the different type of SOPs besides ESOPs that are consumer SOPs and other things that are out there. And then, Chris Michael has been an early innovator on the perpetual trust idea and got something in a law review journal on it before. So there are people who are really pushing the envelope, getting the idea out there. And we just need to coordinate and really put some time into building out what these could be. I think it's possible to move it forward in the next few years.
Yeah, this is definitely an exciting conversation that's hopefully going to open up some new opportunities. So one more topic I did want to hit on, get a little update before we go. was you've been kind of doing some work with the staffing cooperative. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what that is and sort of what that's angling towards? Because I've had conversations and it seems to be really sort of aspiring to make some pretty sort of large scale impact if you know, things can be pulled off well.
Yeah, no, it's so it is an exciting project. So down in Baltimore, Joseph Curtin and Jeremy Neal and a handful of really good folks down there are working to create employment access for formerly incarcerated individuals. It's completely people of color. It's completely Black-led, and so it's an organization that's just building one. So it's called the Staffing Cooperative. We structured it in a way to both maintain the cooperative values and try to allow for investment. So at the top is a cooperative, an LCA that's incorporated in Colorado, and then it has two subsidiaries, and one is core staffing, which is staffing for formerly incarcerated individuals, so labor staffing primarily, and then tribe staffing, which is placing designers, coders, technologists into companies for you know, temporary work in those companies. So like say that there's a new startup that just got its round of funding and it needs a whole bunch of people, and some of them aren't permanent, some of them are right now. They might look to tribe staffing to fill that, and it's led by and primarily a network of people of color. We've seen a lot of underrepresentation, obviously, I think people know, in the tech industry. So it's a place to give people access to employment that otherwise, you know, I mean, tech is one of those places where people change their names so that they can get interviews, right? So this platform is trying to really elevate, bring together, and create community around people of color in the tech industry. And so the way that the structure works is that all of these businesses are at least 51% owned by the umbrella, and that everybody who works in any of them is a member of the umbrella, right? So this whole umbrella is member driven, and there's local governance at each of the nodes. But each of the nodes can also take in traditional venture capital because they're just Delaware C Corps that are 51% owned by this cooperative. So it's kind of, you know, we were trying to balance being very true to the cooperative principles and the values, but allowing some level of investment to come in, because you can only bootstrap for so long before people, you know, have to start getting some kind of salary before, you know, you have to invest in bringing in additional coders. So this was a mechanism to do that. So I'm mostly just helping build out that structure and their bylaws and governance stuff. But it's a very, I'm excited to see the level of innovation and engagement of like groups like the Staffing Cooperative in the cooperative community more. And because of my work with them, it's really inspired in Chicago to build similarly a cooperative that serves formerly incarcerated. We're focusing on women. And so me and a team, all people of color, are coming together, and you know, our kind of ethos is like, we're all people of color, and at least one of us has to have the lived experience of having an interaction with the criminal justice system so that their voice is integrated into the process. And we're in the process of like defining what industries we want. Staffing, we were going to be part of the staffing co-op before. That was kind of the idea, but we decided for us, staffing didn't make as much sense, because we wanted to build community and space, and we wanted to have a workplace where everybody who we were bringing in worked. And for staffing, you're sending people off, and I think that it's one of the places where that's where formerly incarcerated people have an opportunity to work. So it's a great place to have that. But for us, it was important for us to build that community. So we were going to go a different direction in terms of what kind of company we're building. We're just doing this. We've hired a business consultant, and we have 2 organizers on the team. And so what we're doing is basically working with that business consultant within our parameters, which are that we want it to have a good number of jobs. We want to make sure that it's safe, it can provide living wages, and that it's not detrimental to community. Like, we're not going to do anything that's gentrifying our local communities or displacing people, right? So it has those basic values. And we're working with a business consultant to see what industries that we would be able to successfully operate in that can kind of live those values. And hopefully the Venn diagram comes up with something in there, some industry in there, but we're kind of vetting a longer list and getting it down to a couple, which we should have our industry within, and start moving forward on it within the month. So by mid-May, we should be pushing forward with the industry that we've chosen. So we're working with that business consultant, and then we're going to bring the choices, the narrow choices, back to a larger group of people, of advisors, all of whom have interaction with the criminal justice system or have been incarcerated before, to kind of vet those ideas with potential worker owners to see, like, is this something that feels like it would be liberating, or does it feel like it'll be soul crushing and oppressive for us to work in that in industry? So that's kind of our process, and hopefully we'll have more to share in the next couple months.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this. This was a fun first conversation for our little EO conversations thing. We've been talking with Camille, and if people are interested in your work and wanted to reach out, what's the best way to find you, Camille?
Oh yeah, so my email address is camille.a.kerr@gmail, and I am always happy to talk to people about what I'm up to, and I'll just send you my Calendly link and set up a time to chat.
Cool. All right. Well, with that, I'll be aiming to do one of these conversations at least once a month. So if anyone's interested in coming on and talking about something of note in the employee ownership world, just shoot me an email, matt@veoc.org. And you'll be able to find the full interview on our YouTube channel at the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. So thank you, Camille.